The city was restless, and the cold pierced to the bone with a kind of biting chill that lingered in the air. In a small corner behind a crowded cafe, John Mitchell sat on a battered cardboard box, with his few belongings tightly wrapped beside him. John, a man in his late 60s, had spent many years in military service, and those years were etched on his face through a hardened jawline and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. His rough hands trembled slightly as he held a small cup of coffee, given to him by a passing stranger. This warm cup was a simple kindness, something rare in his world for everyone. In the crowded street, John was invisible, just another shadow in the background of their busy lives. But John hadn't always been this way. Once, Sergeant John Mitchell was a leader and a protector, someone people looked up to with respect. But between his battles on foreign lands and his inner struggles, his life took a dark turn. After returning home, the civilian world that once seemed familiar became strange to him. His friends drifted away, his family grew distant, and the job he was promised vanished into thin air. Suddenly, he was alone on the streets, struggling in a society that seemed to have forgotten him. The days blended together, each one colder and harsher than the last. John learned to survive on very little, eating meals from shelters and finding comfort in the rare moments of humanity extended to him. One of those moments came from the cafe manager, who would sometimes give him leftover food. But this fragile kindness was shattered on a cold evening, when the manager, worried about the image of the establishment, decided to call the police. A few minutes later, a police officer arrived. His expression was firm, but not without kindness. "Sir, you can't stay here," the officer said in a steady voice. "You are trespassing." John didn't argue. Years of discipline had taught him to follow orders without question. Silently, he gathered his few belongings, stood up, and prepared to leave. But as he turned his back, the officer grabbed his arm. "Sorry, sir, but we've received complaints," the officer added in a gentler yet firm tone. John's heart sank. He had only hoped to be left in peace. Instead, he was taken away and booked at the police station for trespassing. As he sat in the corner of the cell, he felt the cold seeping through his bones from the iron bench. His mind felt numb as he thought about the thousands of nights he had spent this way, alone, forgotten, and unwanted. When the officers gave him a date for a hearing, John nodded, his voice barely a whisper as he agreed to attend. Deep down, he wondered to himself, did it even matter anymore? On the day of the hearing, John entered the courtroom with his head bowed. He didn't expect sympathy, and he never had. He wore a mismatched coat donated by a shelter and shoes that hurt his toes. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them in front of him, waiting for his name to be called. The courtroom was filled with whispers and judgments, people exchanging curious glances. John was just another homeless man, ruined by life. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone stood in respect. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She began reading the files in front of her. Finally, she reached John's file, looked around the room, and her eyes settled on him. "John Mitchell," she called out in an official, strong voice. John raised his hand slightly and nodded. His mouth was too dry to speak. The judge began reading his file, but something caught her attention. She stopped reading and looked at a certain line again. She raised her head and narrowed her eyes as if she recognized him. "John Mitchell," she repeated, her voice softer, almost to herself. Under her gaze, John grew uncomfortable, wishing he knew why she was so interested in him. The judge set the file aside and looked him straight in the eyes, and there was an unusual warmth in her expression. "Mr. Mitchell," she began in a calm voice, her hand hesitating slightly, "were you by any chance in the 80th Airborne Division?" Silence filled the courtroom as everyone listened intently. John's eyes widened and memories flooded over him. "Yes, Mom," he said quietly, nodding his head. "I served there a long time ago," his voice breaking slightly. Under the weight of those memories, the judge leaned back in her chair, her eyes filled with tears as she continued speaking. "Mr. Mitchell, my brother was in your unit and often shared stories about a man who saved his life, someone he called brave, selfless, and a true hero. That man was John Mitchell." She paused, her voice filled with emotion. "You are that man, aren't you?" Amazement spread through the hall as everyone's eyes began to change toward John. He was no longer just another homeless man, but a hero who had endured, who had risked everything for his country. John nodded, his throat tight, barely able to speak. "I did my duty, Mom. I just did what I thought was right," he whispered as he looked down, humbled by her words. Even the judge's throat tightened, clear emotion on her face. Then she composed herself before addressing the hall. "This man," she said in a clear and strong voice, "served our country with more courage than many of us can comprehend. He stands here today facing charges just for seeking shelter. He deserves our respect, not condemnation." She turned to John, and her voice became gentle now. "Mr. Mitchell, I dismiss these charges. Furthermore, I order that you be given immediate assistance. You deserve more than this. You deserve support, stability, and a place you can call home." John's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, he felt truly seen. Not as a burden, but as someone who matters. The audience that once judged him now looked at him with admiration. Strangers approached him after the session, shaking his hand, thanking him for his service, and offering words of encouragement. And for the first time in years, John felt hope, a warmth melting away the years of cold he had endured. As he left the courtroom that day, tears streamed down his face, but not from sadness, rather from gratitude. The weight he had carried all these years began to lighten, replaced by a glimmer of optimism that was no longer invisible. After the hearing, the judge personally arranged for John to be connected with the Veteran Service Program within days. Temporary housing was provided for him, along with counseling services. The program staff listened to his story with genuine interest, which helped him feel valued again. Slowly, John began to rebuild his life at the shelter. He met others with similar stories. Veterans who faced difficulties after returning home came together and formed a small community, supporting each other as they faced their struggles. John began to grow, sharing his experiences and mentoring younger veterans who were just starting to navigate civilian life. While walking in the city one day, he passed the cafe where his troubles began. The manager, who had called the police, recognized him and hesitated, unsure what to say. But to his surprise, John smiled and nodded. His heart was free of bitterness. He had found peace and forgiveness, and he was determined to move forward. Months later, John was invited to speak at a community event honoring veterans. He stood on the stage and shared his story, not just about his service, but about his struggles and the kindness that brought him back from the edge of despair. His words touched the audience and inspired many to take action to support those who had served. By the end of the year, John was able to secure a small apartment decorated with memories from his past and new symbols of hope on his wall. He hung a framed photo of his unit, a reminder of the brotherhood he had formed, and kept a letter from the judge thanking him for his service and expressing her gratitude for the sacrifices he had made. John Mitchell's journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, he faced the future with a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer defined by his struggles, but by his resilience and the community that had gathered around him. As he sat by his window, sipping a warm cup of coffee, he allowed himself to dream of better days ahead.